would not have been possible for the Russian armed forces, for the Russian state. And in that sense, therefore, Rosatom is no ordinary corporation. The Zaporizhzhia plant is being used as a military platform by the Russian armed forces, by the Russian state. The International Atomic Energy Agency is blocked from accessing key areas of the plant.
Russian army exploded the Kakhovka dam, so losing this cooling water. But if everything would stop, then there is an estimation that it would take between 1 and 2 weeks before you would have a core meltdown. However, the range of scenarios of releases is enormous.
Hello and welcome to Ukraine in Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Centre and NGO Your Atlantic Course. And I'm your host, Matt Wickham. And in this episode, we will talk about Greenpeace's intensified radiation monitoring in Ukraine. If you want to learn more about this subject, please continue watching this video and don't forget to press subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any of our videos in the future. The Russian occupation of Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant since March 4th, 2022 has resulted in multiple safety violations, including deploying military equipment, mining the territory, and causing equipment failures, endangering the plant's safety. Reports from Ukraine and the IAEA suggest that the occupation increases the risk of further failures at the Zaporizhzhia plant, prompting concerns about escalating dangers under Russia's occupied control. Meanwhile, Greenpeace, alongside Savednipro and other groups, have strategically placed radiation sensors across key Ukrainian areas to provide real-time data via the Safe Eco Bot map, aiding local authorities and emergency services in bolstering community protection in the event of heightened radiation levels due to a potential nuclear incident and sabotage. Our first guest, Burney, nuclear specialist at Greenpeace, will delve into Rosatom's pivotal role in Russia's war in Ukraine, emphasizing how Russia's use of the power plant strategically hinges on Rosatom's involvement. Additionally, Burney will address Hungary's resistance to imposing nuclear sanctions on Rosatom and the contribution of technology companies like Siemens and other nations such as France and Germany in enabling Russia and Rosatom to perpetrate their occupation of Ukraine, essentially prolonging the threats to global security. Let's listen.
The Rosatom Nuclear Corporation is a state Russian agency. In that sense, it serves the purpose of constructing, developing everything nuclear in the Russian Federation, but also overseas. It serves the strategic interests of the Russian state. And our analysis from February, March 2022 is effectively that without Rosatom, the deliberate targeting and occupation of the Chernobyl plant in February 2022, and the Zaporizhzhia plant in March 2022, and indeed the attempted attack on the Yuzhno-Ukrainsk South Ukraine nuclear plant, also in March 2022, would not have been possible for the Russian armed forces, for the Russian state. And in that sense, therefore, Rosatom is no ordinary corporation. Greenpeace, following the occupation of Zaporizhzhia, has been trying to understand the operations of both the Russian military and Rosatom at the nuclear plant. In September, we released an assessment by McKinsey Intelligence in the UK, which identified that, in fact, of course, the Zaporizhzhia plant is being used as a military platform by the Russian armed forces, by the Russian state, to target, in particular, the population in Dnipro on the other side of what was the Kakhovka reservoir, and identified firing locations between 1 and 18 kilometers from the Zaporizhzhia plant. That's only one aspect of how the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant is being used strategically by the Russian state, by the Russian armed forces in this war against the people of Ukraine. And Rosatom is enabler. They are enabling this. They're with their own personnel from Rosatom, as indicated, flown in to Ukraine to occupy a Ukraine nuclear power plant. So our conclusion of that assessment of McKinsey was that not only are Rosatom occupying a nuclear power plant, enabling the Russian forces, But the actual oversight of the site by the IEA is flawed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is blocked from accessing key areas of the plant. There are only 4 staff from the IEA. We have deep respect for their bravery on site, but unfortunately the IEA is not able to conduct and apply its mandate, its mission at the site. Consequently, there are serious questions about what the IEA is doing at the Zaporizhzhia site, and an attempt to almost normalize the military occupation of what is Europe's largest nuclear power plant. And as we've heard, there's an enormous range of reactor scenarios that would release enormous amounts of radioactivity. And yet, if you continue to read the IEA's reporting, which is normally once a week, it's effectively normalizing a situation which is very, very far from normal. And Rosatom is at the heart of this, and yet, Rosatom continues to operate not just inside the Russian Federation, but overseas and in partners. And just to highlight one example of Rosatom's atomic partners, this is the CEO of Rosatom, Mr. Ligachev, with the CEO of Framatome of France. This is 3 months before the full-scale invasion in February 2022, where Rosatom and Framatome, a French state nuclear agency, are signing a deal for the cooperation to extend their long-standing relationship for the development of nuclear power overseas, in particular Framatome's involvement in supplying what's called instrumentation and control technology, which is the sort of brains of a nuclear power plant. And Rosatom are dependent upon Framatome because it's passed EU regulations, and they're able to promote their overseas sales with that European sanctioned technology. Only in these last weeks, the Rosatom project in Hungary, the Paks nuclear plant, this is for 2 new reactors. The construction of the site has effectively begun, although the actual pouring of the reactor concrete will not be until next year. But only in the last weeks, and in fact in the last few days, we've heard the Hungarian foreign minister basically saying, we will not allow sanctions against Rosatom. What does that mean? Over the last year and a half, you've had demands for sanctions against many areas of the Russian state and their overseas business, but so far, no nuclear sanctions against Rosatom. And why is that? Because there's a vested interest, in large part by the European nuclear industry, backed by their governments, and in this case, Hungary, but also clearly the French state and Framatome, to effectively block any efforts to control Rosatom's and to stop Rosatom's business. Another dimension to the Paks project is it's not just a French-Russian program inside Hungary, the only one inside the EU. It's also a German project because Siemens, one of the largest corporations in Europe, is directly involved. An agreement long-standing with Rosatom. This is the current head of the supervisory board, former CEO of Siemens, only in the last few days, basically defending Siemens' relationship with Rosatom and arguing that if they were to cancel supply of technology to the Hungary project, it would potentially cost them unlimited millions, assuming, therefore, that it would be sued by the Hungarian state. And this is about a nuclear trade with a nuclear company, Rosatom, that is in the illegal occupation of the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant, threatening a nuclear disaster. There can be really no moral defense of an argument from Siemens on that. Our conclusion was, of course, that sanctions must be applied to Rosatom for terminating all nuclear trade with the Russian state by European partners. And that in particular applies to France, the Framatome Corporation, and also Siemens. If we look at Zaporizhzhia itself, as we've heard, there is the potential for a severe radiological event. We're not calling it an accident. It would be most likely a deliberate act of sabotage by the Russian armed forces, together with Rosatom, because they know about nuclear plants. That is unconscionable. There can be no defense of not maximizing the pressure against the Russian state, and in this case, against the Russian nuclear state, which is Rosatom. And therefore, our demands are that sanctions must be applied. They must be comprehensive. They must terminate ongoing cooperation between all European nuclear industries, in particular Framatome and Siemens. No new contracts. The transfer of technology, knowledge, including the operation of personnel from France and other countries at Russian nuclear plants, has to be immediately stopped. And then there's also the question about the International Atomic Energy Agency, and in particular how it's reporting to the Ukrainian government and to the international community about the operations at Zaporizhzhia, the operations of the Russian military and Rosatom.
Our next guest, John Vande Putte, nuclear specialist at Greenpeace, tells how Greenpeace's collaboration with Savednipro is crucial due to the imminent nuclear threat in Ukraine posed by Russia. They've meticulously assessed the technical aspects in case of an attack, considering deliberate acts of sabotage aimed at triggering a nuclear release. Discussions have revolved around the potential extensive and far-reaching impact of nuclear radiation release resulting from an attack or sabotage. Let's listen.
The reason why it's so important for Greenpeace to work with Savednipro to establish this elaborated network of sensors is because there is a serious threat from the Russian occupation, the Russian invasion for nuclear safety in Ukraine. So from the very beginning of the full-scale war from Russia in Ukraine, we've been focusing with my colleague Sean on the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. So our first assessment was on the 2nd of March last year, 2 days before the Russian forces invaded the nuclear power plant. And we looked in technical detail about the possible risks if such a thing, such an attack could happen. Unfortunately, it did happen. And so over the time, over almost, let's say, 20 months, this situation at Zaporizhzhia has evolved. And of course, in the first phase, the focus was on the risks of this invasion, which created a lot of damage itself. And then later on, the focus shifted on the poor management of the power plant by Rosatom, also flying in new staff from Russia, which was not qualified to work at that nuclear power plant, a whole series of consequences related to that. And then the Russian army exploded the Kakhovka dam, so losing this cooling water. Let's say the global attention was much on the cooling water that was of the Kakhovka reservoir. However, for us, for Greenpeace, our technical assessment was very clearly on the risk of the electricity supply before the Kakhovka and after the Kakhovka disaster. But what really made a huge impression, I think, is that it was clear that the Russian forces could do about anything, and it increasingly we were worried about a deliberate act of sabotage by Russian forces, by Rosatom experts, to sabotage the nuclear power plant with the aim to create a nuclear release into the environment. There's, however, another dimension to this, and there are 4 nuclear power plants in Ukraine, a part of the Chernobyl, the old Chernobyl, which is then the 5th. There are 4 nuclear power plants in Ukraine, and 3 are not under Russian occupation. However, 2 of them have been under attack by Russian missiles. And most prominently in September last year, there was a missile attack very close to the reactor buildings of the South Ukrainian nuclear power plant, close to Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, where 300 meters from the reactor buildings, a missile impacted and damaged especially the electricity infrastructure, which is a very severe event for nuclear safety, because a reactor power plant, a nuclear power plant, requires electricity to keep the cooling going on. And so it is a very severe, even if the reactor building itself was not impacted that much, it is a very severe safety-related issue. So making an overview of those 2 cases, looking at the kind of reactor type we have in Zaporizhzhia, which is a VVR 1000 reactor, where in the reactor building you have 6 reactor buildings, 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia. It's the largest in Europe power plant. But in each of those reactor buildings, you have 2, not 1, but 2 largest sources of radioactivity, which is obviously the reactor core, where the heat is produced to produce electricity, but also the spent fuel pool, which actually contains a larger amount of radioactivity than is present in the reactor itself. However, it is at a lower temperature, but still requires active cooling. And so for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant today, all 6 reactors are in shutdown since September last year. And so this spent fuel, both in the core and in the spent fuel pool, has further cooled down. This means that if all cooling would stop, and there are many systems to keep cooling going, but if everything would stop, then there is an estimation that it would take between 1 and 2 weeks before you would have a core meltdown. It could still happen, but it would take a lot of time. And you could have a large nuclear disaster also in Zaporizhzhia. If you compare that with an operational nuclear reactor, this is a much shorter reaction time. However, our assessment is that the main risk is still at Zaporizhzhia. Why is that? Because at an operational nuclear reactor, which is under control by Ukraine, even if you have a military attack on the power plant and some systems fail, there's still many steps that the operator could take, the Ukrainian operator Rosatom could take in order to correct, to intervene. It would be very dangerous, but there could still be time, even if the time is shorter, to intervene. And so our main concern for that reason is at this point that a deliberate act, for instance, at Zaporizhzhia, to lead to a nuclear release at the nuclear power plant. And of course, what could be the consequences? They could be far-reaching, and there's a whole range of scenarios. Not because there would be an accident, that it would necessarily lead to a large-scale release. However, the range of scenarios of releases is enormous, and Ukrainian authorities and also German institutes are doing an hourly simulation of dispersion models. If at a certain moment a release would happen, what would be the consequences? There's also this Austrian, I apologize for the spelling, but it's an Austrian modeling for Zaporizhzhia. It shows they have done 90 simulations under different weather patterns, like wind direction, air pressure, precipitation. And so, depending on these weather conditions, even a large scale of release would have a totally different impact. However, from a statistical point of view, It is clear that...
And next, Polina Kolodyazhna, Greenpeace, Ukraine Recovery Project Manager, talks about Greenpeace's ongoing efforts in Ukraine to involve green reconstruction, community empowerment and monitoring to showcase the impact of the Russian occupation of Ukraine.
Since the outset of the full-scale invasion, Greenpeace has been actively involved, conducting monitoring and initiating work without hesitation. In spring 2022, we commenced the Green Reconstruction of Ukraine project, aimed at restoring the nation's damaged public infrastructure. This initiative, led by Thomas Minkmer, focuses not only on incorporating green technologies like solar panels and heat pumps into facility reconstruction, but also involves extensive community engagement, empowering them to independently partake in the restoration efforts by fostering understanding in various areas. Another critical aspect of our work is monitoring and unveiling the distressing impact of Russia's actions. Our efforts took us to Chernobyl last year to document the consequences of the Russian occupation, a task continued this year. Additionally, we journeyed to southern Ukraine, aiding in the installation of radiation measurement sensors. These actions serve to provide crucial insights and emphasize the ongoing repercussions to the European community.
You've been watching the special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euroatlantic course dedicated to the Russian-Ukrainian war, Ukraine in Flames. In the description under this video, you can find more information on how you can help Ukraine fight Russian aggression. If you find our work useful, please like and share this video. Slava Ukraini.